our good friend, Senator Ted Cruz. How are you, Senator?
Mark, I'm doing terrific. Great to be with you in the free state of Florida.
It's fantastic. Free state is true. The reason the Senator is with us tonight is not just because he has a new book out, but because he has a great book out. The book is called Going Further, and it is the Incomparable Clarence Thomas. And Clarence Thomas is one of the greats. He's one of the great legal minds. He's a very, very courageous man all throughout his life, including on the Supreme Court. And the Senator has captured this. You have a very unique way of writing, which is, it's intriguing. You take a tough subject, you make it understandable, and yet your intellect and scholarship come through in this book. I don't see that a lot. There's like two sides of Ted Cruz, very similar to me. That is, you've got your political side, the side where you got to debate, you got to fight, you got to do this, and then there's the intellectual side. And you move between both, and you do such a fantastic job in this book. So let me ask you something, Senator. There have been other books on Clarence, including Clarence's book.
Sure.
Justice Thomas. Why did you decide to write it this time?
Well, because I think it's an important book. I think it needs to be written. Clarence Thomas, you and I have both known Justice Thomas a long, long time, decades. He is extraordinary. He is one of a kind. His personal story is jaw-dropping, and it's a lot of young people don't know his personal story. They don't know that he started from abject poverty. They don't know that he started from nothing. They don't know that he ended up having a period where he was a radical leftist. A lot of people don't know that in college, Clarence Thomas had a giant afro and wore camouflage pants and combat boots and was protesting in Harvard Square and had Malcolm X on the wall. I mean that's a different Clarence Thomas than Justice Thomas today. And his story, I think, is remarkable when combined with his jurisprudence and who he is as a justice. He is right now today the second longest serving Supreme Court justice in history. In 2 years, in 2028, Clarence Thomas will become the longest serving justice in the history of this country. That is breathtaking, and I will say objectively, he is also one of the most consequential jurists ever to serve on the court. And so with books, look, I try to do what you do. We just tell stories. I think that's how the human mind interacts. That's how we understand the world around us. And what I do in this book is two things. One, just tell Justice Thomas's story, starting with growing up, Pinpoint, Georgia, rural Georgia, right along the coast, abject poverty. His father left him when he was young. He was initially raised by a single mom. At one point, he's living in a tenement with no indoor plumbing, where they had an outhouse outside. They had a chamber pot. He describes as a little 5-6-year-old boy carrying the chamber pot full down the steps of the tenement. He trips and falls, collapses at the bottom of the stairs, entirely covered in stale urine. Now, that's not exactly the typical beginning for a Supreme Court justice. He ends up, his mother struggled and had challenges her whole life. As a young boy, his mom takes Clarence and his brother to be raised by her father, by Clarence's grandfather, Myers Anderson. If you want to understand Clarence Thomas, you got to understand Myers Anderson. Now, Myers Anderson was a hard man. He was the son of a freed slave. He had very limited education, was functionally illiterate, could make a mark or two. But he worked hard. He delivered fuel. He built his own business as a fuel delivery business. And young Clarence and his brother Myers, when they came to work, the day they showed up, he said, "The damn vacation is over." Now think about, growing up with absolute poverty, and also the neighborhoods they had been in were pretty rough. They were dangerous. And Clarence Thomas referred to his grandfather as Daddy. And Daddy was incredibly disciplined, incredibly strict. He made them work. They got up early. And their one respite for work was reading. Reading was okay. And so young Clarence Thomas would go to the library and just read every book there and read and read and read. And the values that Myers Anderson taught Clarence Thomas are still there with him today. When Justice Thomas wrote his autobiography, he called it My Grandfather's Son. If you haven't read it, I recommend go buy My Grandfather's Son. It's a great autobiography. He tells his own story. That journey is incredible, but that book ends with his being confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. You know, the reason for the title Going Further is there is no justice in the history of the Supreme Court who has been more willing to go further, to say, we should go back and reconsider this. If a precedent is wrong, we should overturn it. We should go further, go back to the Constitution, go back to the original understanding of the Constitution. And Justice Thomas is a scholar. And what I try to do in the book is explain these Supreme Court opinions in a way that anybody can understand it. I write the book so you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a constitutional law expert. I try to write the book so that a smart high school kid, a smart junior high kid, can pick it up and read it and understand this is who Clarence Thomas is, this was his journey, and this is why he's one of the most important human beings to have ever lived in America.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this, Senator. Who were the great influences? This is all in the book. But who are the great influences that had an impact on his thinking, moving him from really sort of a Marxist, if you will, into originalism? Who were the writers, the thinkers, and what does he mean by originalism? And I want people to understand, you interviewed the justice as well. You had significant access to the justice as well.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I went and sat down with Justice Thomas, and I said, I'm thinking of writing this book. And I asked, would you sit down and be interviewed? And he kind of laughed, and he said, Ted, if it was anyone else, he said, if you were a law professor, my answer would be no. But my background, I was a clerk at the court. I clerked for Chief Justice Rehnquist. Before I was in the Senate, my career, I was a Supreme Court litigator. I argued in front of the court. And then obviously for 14 years, I've been in the Senate and been on the Senate Judiciary Committee and part of confirming a great number of justices now. And I do think that combination of backgrounds lets me tell his story in a way that many others could not. And the justice was incredibly kind. We sat for 9.5 hours of just one-on-one interviews. And I'd come meet him 8 a.m. in chambers, sit down, put down a tape recorder, and 2-3 hours, he'd be like, ask whatever you want. And we'd kind of be far-ranging and just ask, trying to probe on what makes Clarence Thomas, Clarence Thomas. And that was, and then actually he also sat for his very first podcast. So starting, as you know, I do a podcast, Verdict with Ted Cruz. Tomorrow and Wednesday, we have an hour-long podcast where he sat and he and I talk one-on-one, just like you and I are, which I was very grateful he took the time to do that. Look, this book, I wrote this book because I think this story needs to be told. I look at, if Clarence Thomas were liberal, he would be venerated. You would have schools named after him. You'd have honorary degrees from every law school in America. You would have kids wearing chic shirts, like think Notorious RBG. Like CT would be a brand and an emblem, and instead, the left despises him. And they have a particular level of vitriol. Look, Antonin Scalia was brilliant. You and I both knew Justice Scalia well. He had an incandescent mind. He was very conservative. And yet the left didn't despise him the way they hate Clarence Thomas. And their view is he is a traitor to his race, that no black man is allowed to think the way he does. And so he has been subject to absolute just hate. And look, in the book, tracing his upbringing, how did he become a conservative? How did he become Clarence Thomas? He's raised by his grandfather. He would deliver fuel with him in the winter and the cold. His grandfather would not let the boys wear gloves. He thought gloves made you weak. Your fingers just had to be cold. He would stuff newspaper into his clothes to warm up because they were delivering oil in the early hours of the morning. In the summer, they went to a farm and built a farm. And Justice Thomas talked to me about learning how to plow a farm. And he said, the first line you plow, it's got to be straight. Because if it's not straight, every row afterwards will be crooked. And that's very much the approach. He drew that analogy. The analogy kind of leapt off the page, but he went ahead and drew it and said, look, that's exactly how I write an opinion, which is you've got to make sure your foundation is right. He approaches opinion writings. One of the things that I really admire about him, his opinions are not highfalutin pieces of writing that are designed for scholars and law professors buried in some library. They're designed so you can pick them up and read them and understand them. You look at, for example, Justice Thomas's opinions on race.